Hello, welcome to At Issue. I'm H. Wayne Wilson, and thank you for joining us for the first program of the 24th season of At Issue right here on WTVP. We're going to be talking about a serious topic, as we often do here on At Issue, and that is the case of child abuse in Central Illinois. A couple of numbers just to set the stage for you before I introduce the panelists. 90% of child abuse victims know their perpetrator. 68% of the abused victims are abused by a family member, and 59%, the victims are 59% more likely to end up in jail as a juvenile. Those are relatively startling numbers in my opinion, and we're going to talk about some programs that are going to help reduce those numbers in the future with our four panelists. And let me introduce first Carrie Hartwig, who's Director of Early Childhood Services at Crittenden Centers. Carrie, thank you for joining us.
Certainly.
Across from her, Sarah Delafeld, the Director of Family-Centered Services for the Center for Prevention of Abuse in Peoria. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Karen Major is over in Bloomington, where she is the Director of Family and Community Services for the Baby Fold. Thank you for driving over.
Thank you for having me.
And Dr. Kay Saving is the founder of the Pediatric Resource Center that is operated by the University of Illinois College of Medicine at Peoria. We're going to talk about what Pediatric Resource Center is and in the other organizations as well. But first, let's see if we can't define, and this might be difficult, but define child abuse.
Well, it takes more than just a couple words. I would say that sort of thinking of it as an act or a failure to act on the part of a caretaker towards a child in their care that ultimately results in harm to that particular child. And it encompasses a lot of things. One thing is physical abuse. So, for instance, if a parent or a babysitter strikes a child and causes harm to that child, bruises that child, or does something else that physically harms that child, we call that physical abuse. Sexual abuse can encompass a lot of things. If there's some sort of sexual act done against a child, again, by someone in a caretaking position. And when we talk about caretakers, that can be parents, babysitters, it can be a coach at school, it can be someone who is in a caretaking role of some sort for that child. There's also the issue of neglect. And a lot of children are neglected. That's when the caretaker is not providing what they need: food, clothing, shelter, medical appointments or medicines. That would be medical neglect. Then there's also emotional neglect. A child who is in an environment where they are just yelled at all of the time, or they're treated inappropriately, they're told they're stupid, they're always criticized, never built up, no positive reinforcement. That is emotional neglect. Witnessing domestic violence in the home is also considered child abuse for a child. And what we see a lot of times are multiple types of child abuse going on in the same environment. Sometimes just one, but often multiple types.
As we become more comfortable with talking about child abuse in the home, it occurs to me that in listening to your answer, Dr. Saving, that the definition, as we become, I don't know that comfortable is the right word, but as we talk more about it, the definition has become broader and broader to the point that bullying is included in the definition and many other things. I know you couldn't do a laundry list of everything but things that, when I grew up, yes, there was bullying in my schoolyard. It was, I guess, accepted. But looking back, it was inappropriate.
It certainly was inappropriate. And I think that as the years go on, there's more and more research coming out about bullying or other types of violence. And really, it's about looking at how that is affecting the children now and then again as they age. And what we're noticing is that all types of violence have some impact on children, and that impact varies from child to child, but really it's becoming more public knowledge. The community is better informed about what to look for, and I think that's why we're seeing the definition expand a little bit more.
There are risk factors that help us identify if you have more than one or two or three risk factors, it's more likely to have abuse in a home?
Certainly. When we look at a family and how they're made up, we want to consider the things that they've seen when they were growing up, but then also things like what is their income level, what is their education, what kinds of additional stressors are in that home. Is there substance abuse? Is there homelessness? Is there transience? Anything like that that's going to create a more stressful environment, you see a propensity for those things that would lead up to abuse.
And I think it's important to stress, too, that just because you are a single parent, which is more likely to have an abusive environment, that doesn't mean that's an abusive
Right.
environment. And so we all agree that there are many single-parent homes, many lower socioeconomic homes where there's not abuse going on. But there certainly are risk factors, and those are families that can be identified as higher risk, so you can target services to them, which a lot of the people here today do.
In homes that may have no evident risk factors can in fact have child abuse.
Yes, there is no home that cannot have that, or environment. It can be anywhere.
So how do we know, and I read off some numbers at the start of the program, but those are just what we know about. Is there a concern that child abuse is more pervasive than we think it is?
I think everyone in this field knows that that's true, and I think many people outside the field know that also. The example that's used a lot is tip of the iceberg, and the reports that are made each year, and in the United States there are about 3 to 3.5 million calls made to hotlines, and every state has a hotline you can use. About that many calls made at about 6.5 million kids, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. Those calls that are made, we know about those kids, but then underneath the water are all these other kids that we know are being abused, and that's not being dealt with. And even in prevention programs where you can identify high-risk families, you can only identify the ones that are identified to you. So we know there are a lot of other families also out there that aren't getting those services.
And it's really been a history of services, or over time learning what those factors are that lead to child abuse. It doesn't mean in every situation when you have poverty or you have a single parent family that it will automatically mean that there will be child abuse, but we learn in combination more stressors, and then you add unemployment or divorce or domestic violence, then there's more trauma to the children, and we're starting to really look at it more as trauma.
Right.
So I don't know that we're not calling it abuse, but we're calling it experiences of trauma that the children have over their life. And we're bullying, maybe for one child, they may be able to deal with that. Depending on other things that have happened in their life, that bullying can be a very traumatic experience for that child. So it's more abusive, I guess, in that situation.
And we know the numbers are underreported.
Right.
People are not, standing outside of their homes shouting out, "I'm abusing my child." It's a family secret. They don't want the world to know what's happening in their homes. So their parents or the abuser, whoever's perpetuating the child abuse, does a very good job of making sure that abuse stays secret.
And with that in mind, that really was part of the reason that the Pediatric Resource Center was created back in 1993. Can you tell me a little bit about how that evolved?
Right. At the time, 1993, I was working at the Children's Hospital of Illinois and the university in the pediatric department. And what we found, we would have children who were severely injured that came into the hospital. And what we found out was that there really wasn't a place in Peoria, or even really in our region in central Illinois, where children could go to get a good child-centered, family-friendly exam by someone who was experienced and knowledgeable about abuse, for either a physical abuse exam or sexual abuse exam or examination for neglect. That really wasn't available, a place for them to go. Most of the children would end up in the emergency department, which is very appropriate if they have an acute severe injury where they need to go there. But if it's 2 in the morning and the child reveals to the parent that they were sexually abused, maybe a month or 2 ago, going to the emergency department at 2 in the morning is very traumatic for everyone, the child and the family. So we felt we needed to have a place where we could give a child-centered, family-friendly environment where the child felt safe. We could reassure the child and family, do that medical evaluation. So what we do is we offer that medical evaluation piece, medical case coordination, so we make sure that in addition to the exam, the other pieces are there. They're hooked into DCFS if that's not already what they're doing, or other needs that they have. So that's how we originally got started. We do that. We see about 300, 350 kids a year. We also have a very large educational component to medical personnel as well as community personnel, other providers of the part of the multidisciplinary team.
I want to talk about the education component in just a moment, but when you say that you're identifying abuses, are you primarily looking for signs of physical abuse and sexual abuse, or are you trained to see beyond that, where you might identify, for instance, bullying?
When we see the child, the children are referred to us. Either they can be referred from a physician or from law enforcement, or we have a contract with DCFS and they come at that time to us, usually early in the investigation. So there usually there's some sort of allegation or history of what has happened to the child, physical abuse or sexual abuse. So we do a history taking, complete medical history of the incident. We do physical examination of the child. But in taking the history about the incident, but also about the rest of the child's history, a social history, a family history, past medical history, we always do that. It sometimes does turn up these other kinds of issues, which may be bullying at school. That's not an abuse by a caretaker against a child. It's with another child. But if that is an issue that surfaces, we make sure that they get the appropriate counseling and other things that they need to be able to deal with that issue. So yes, we often do identify other things.
We've spent the first few moments of the program talking about how widespread the issue of child abuse is. Let's talk about some solutions, and let's turn to Crittenden Centers in Peoria. And Crisis Nursery is one. You have several programs, but Crisis Nursery is one where a family can say, help.
Absolutely. Our crisis nursery is open 365 days a year, 24 hours a day. And if a family finds themselves experiencing a lot of stress and they're to that point where they're saying, I need help with my child, they can give us a call and we will arrange for them to have respite care so that they can have time to de-stress, to maybe go and speak with someone, a professional, about how they're feeling, get some resources, and then start back working on that relationship with their child.
Do they come to you freely, or are they referred, or how do you let people know that this program exists?
Sure. We have some agencies that refer. We're very community-based at Crittenden. We like to partner with all of the agencies at this table and in our community to help families. But then we also have families that will call us of their own accord.
And
They've heard about it maybe from a family member or a friend, and they give us a call.
And does the Crisis Nursery work in conjunction with the Strengthening Families program?
It does. Our whole agency embraces this model of strengthening the family because we really believe that to get to the core of preventing child abuse and neglect, you have to break that cycle and help families understand what it looks like to be a good parent and what it means to have a great relationship with your child and what should you expect developmentally from them. So we really, across all of our programs, focus on helping families understand what their role is in being a great parent.
It strikes me that you said something that really caught my attention. What is a strong family? What is a good family?
Right.
And we know that, especially as Ozzie and Harriet was 50 years ago. Ozzie and Harriet probably isn't the definition anymore. What is a strong family?
I think that's a really good question. I think you can look at it in any number of ways, but when you look at the protective factors or those factors that help strengthen a family, it's a parent, whether it's one or two parent family, who understands appropriate child development. They understand about discipline. They're providing reinforcement or good parenting to their children. They have coping skills. And when they're feeling stress, they have people to reach out to who can help them understand what it means to be stressed and when those times are that you're in a place where you might need some support or you think you might lash out at your children. And that what are those coping skills? So it's about resourcefulness and coping with stresses, because we all have stresses in our lives.
I think resiliency too, being
Right.
resilient when you face adversity or crisis, and that ability to know where to go, know
Right.
who to resource, but
Right.
then to bounce back.
Right.
But they shouldn't be. I think many parents hesitate to say, I need help.
They do.
It's looked at as a fault. It's looked as, I'm a bad parent if I need help.
I think that's one way the community as a whole can help, particularly in the current economic times. Studies just coming out now are showing that since we had the economic downturn, there's been an increase in child abuse. Now, a lot of that has been neglect because parents that lose their jobs, they can't provide proper homes and food and shelter and clothing for their kids, so that's expected. But there appears to be some increase also in physical abuse of children. And again, that goes back to I'm stressed, I don't have the coping skills. Maybe I had them when I had a job, but now the extra stressor is a problem. So I think that if the community is aware, and community can be supportive, so that if you know a young family in your neighborhood or a single mom that is having some difficulties, you can reach out. The community can reach out and help her. Maybe invite her over for dinner, do some things like that, offer to babysit, things like that. That in our, we've lost some of that community-ness as we've become more mobile in our society, and if we can get back to some of that, I think that can help.
So we can say we can help without actually identifying, hey, I think you're having problems raising your child.
Most definitely. It could
Yes.
be as easy as being at the grocery store and seeing that mom who's completely stressed out with the 3-year-old who's screaming because they want a candy bar. It is very easy to go up to that mom and say something reassuring to her. You're doing a good job, Mom. Keep that up. It can be as simple as that, an everyday occurrence that we see in our communities.
Let's talk about the Heart of Illinois Safe from the Start program. I assume safe from the start means from birth.
From birth, what we're learning is that the earlier we start interventions with families, the better the result for those children. So if we can start with a family where a mom has just given birth, or even before mom has given birth, to teach her about nonviolent ways to discipline, to teach her about how violence exposure affects her children, we have a better outcome in the long run.
You don't just work with families, though. You actually reach out into the schools.
We do. We do some preventative programs with the schools. We work very closely with the Center for Prevention of Abuse's Prevention Department in doing presentations like it's not okay to hit, it's not okay to say bad words. We do a lot of preventive programs because we believe if we can reach those children at an early age, give them the tools that they need to successfully deal with conflicts, we have a better chance in the long run of getting those children to use those skills later in life.
I keep hearing this family. We work with the entire family unit. So you don't just deal with mom or just with dad or just
with the child who's having a behavior problem that maybe a parent or someone has, or the school has identified that this child's having some behavior problems. A lot of what we know is that the problems are in the family. And so we do a lot of community-based, home-based services, so we get into the community and into the homes to try and get a better understanding of what's going on in the whole family.
This is under the umbrella of the Healthy Start program.
The Healthy Start program is a community-based program. We work with first-time parents who are age 20 and younger, so a lot of teen parents. And what we know is that if we can really get those moms to form a strong bond right away, there's a window of opportunity to really get a bond going with the parent and a child. And if we can start educating these young parents about child development and discipline and resources and those kinds of things, the incidences of abuse and neglect are very low.
When you say educating, do we talk about, is it a case of making sure mom understands expectations of a child?
Absolutely. What to expect when a child is 2 months old, what to expect, when should a child be potty trained, when kids don't feel well, what does that look like? And when you're feeling stressed, if you have a sick child who's crying day in and day out, what are you supposed to do? Who can you call? What are those resources that you can call upon? Because a lot of these teen parents, a lot of these first-time parents don't have unrealistic expectations for their children. So we try to do a lot of educating about what are realistic.
And we, moments ago, talked about the education component of the Pediatric Resource Center. What kind of education are we talking about from your perspective?
Well, we do several things. I'm going to tag on a little bit there because I know all these programs do, again, a specific example of an educational program. And we have a program that we do at the hospital for new parents before the parents go home from the hospital with a baby. But that's a prevention program about abusive head trauma. Babies, when they're 2 to 4 months of age, they cry. That's what babies do to communicate what they know. And if they cry a lot or they have colic or they're just a baby that cries a lot, that can be very upsetting to a parent, particularly if they don't have other resources. And if they shake that child or do certain things to that child, it can cause a lot of problems, a lot of severe damage to that child. So we have programming to prevent that, and the other agencies in town also participate in that as well as preventing other things. But we focus a lot of our education on medical providers. So throughout Central Illinois, from Iowa to Indiana, we do programs to educate physicians, nurses, all kinds of medical caretakers. We also have programming that we use to educate people who work for Child Protective Services, DCFS, as well as law enforcement, lawyers, judges, all the people that are part of that multidisciplinary team to help take care of child abuse. And then we also have programming for the community. If a daycare center or a school, any other place in the community wants to know more about child abuse, we certainly have programming. We will go out and do programming in that way too.
Taking a look at all 4 programs, or all programs at the 4 agencies, we know that some parents are hesitant to begin with. I don't want to talk about problems in my house. Once they overcome that, then there's the dollar issue. Is there a cost associated with these programs?
The services at Crittenton Centers are free. Except our Child Development Center, we do ask parents to pay a small copay.
And at
But the prevention services, such as the nursery, those are all free services.
Same at the baby fold.
baby fold, and
Completely free.
so and your services are
Right, they're paid for by contractual arrangement and then those kinds of things.
so from a financial point of view, there isn't a reason for a family to say, well, we've got problems, I need to do something, but I don't have any money.
Right. There's no reason why they can't afford it.
That still leaves us with the question of overcoming that first step of saying, you don't want to get to the point where you're sitting there identifying a child who's been sexually or physically abused.
Correct.
Right.
What is there something we can say to encourage people to say, I think something's wrong here?
I think that all of the agencies here, all of the programs, you can call. I think a lot of times it's easier for a parent or family to say, I have a need, like I need someone to help me pay my gas bill, or I need someone to help me transport my child to their medical appointments, but I don't know where to go. Because that's an identified need that anyone might have, and there's no stigma attached to that need. And all of these programs, a parent can call in and say, I have this need, and either they can help them get that filled, or they can say, here's the agency in town that can help you.
Right.
All of us have coordination pieces that will help that, and sometimes a parent, that's the door they'll take because that is something that they don't have so much difficulty asking for. They just don't know where to go. So I would encourage people to say, call any of these programs and agencies in town. That's a foot in the door. And a lot of times once you've gotten help from that agency, they're on the phone now. Well, these are other programs we offer, and if they've had a good result, then they're going to call back the next time with another maybe similar problem. But then when they get in trouble or they're having difficulty with their child or they're concerned they might harm their child, they're going to call because they've established a link.
You've been shaking your head in agreement.
Most definitely. It's about building those relationships. The majority of the referrals that Say from the Start receives are from educators, so teachers, daycare workers, who are noticing some acting out behaviors in their students. So the phone calls that we get are primarily, well, my child's in daycare, the daycare teacher is concerned because he's hitting other children. That's initially why they're calling us. Then through the interview process, finding out, well, maybe there's domestic violence in the home, maybe there's a divorce going on, whatever issue it is, we find that out later.
A final question, real briefly. If I suspect abuse occurring in another household, what's my best choice? Is that to not get involved? I think that's the immediate response. is to not get involved.
There's a
But-
hotline number you can call.
Correct.
Okay, 1-800-252-ABUSE is the Illinois hotline number. So you can call that number and report that. If you don't feel comfortable doing that, and you may feel comfortable working on a relationship with that family in some fashion, but you certainly can call that number, and they can also give you some education about that through that hotline number.
1-800-25-ABUSE. And with that, we have run out of time in the first program of the 24th season of At Issue. Let me say thank you to my guests. First, Carrie Hartwig, the Director of Early Childhood Services at Crittenden Centers. Thank you.
Thank you.
To Sarah Delafield, the Director of Family Centered Services for the Center for the Prevention of Abuse.
Thank you.
Karen Majors, the Director of Family and Community Services at the Baby Fold.
Thank you.
And Dr. Kay Saving, the founder of the Pediatric Resource Center, affiliated with the Children's Hospital of Illinois and with the University of Illinois College of Medicine at Peoria.
Thank you.
And thank you to all of you, and thank you for joining us for a new season of At Issue. We'll be back next week with another edition. Join us then.